Most criminals, no matter what they did, sit through their trial. They show up, they answer to a jury, and the system does its job. But every once in a while, there are people so violent, so unstable, or so completely beyond the reach of normal legal proceedings that the courtroom itself becomes the problem. Today we are looking at 15 of those people, convicted killers and career criminals whose records are so extreme that even the justice system struggled to keep up. 1. Nikko Jenkins. Nikko Jenkins is a name that is hard to forget if you follow true crime in Nebraska. In August 2013, just days after walking out of prison following 10.5 years for carjacking and assault, he went on a 10-day killing spree across Omaha. He shot and killed 4 people, Jorge Cahiga Ruiz and Juan Uribe Pena at Spring Lake Park on August 11th, Curtis Bradford near 18th and Clark Street on August 19th, and Andrea Kruger near 168th and Fort Street on August 21st. Kruger, a 33-year-old mother of 3, had just finished a late bar shift and stopped at a McDonald's drive-thru on the way home. Jenkins and family members followed her, blocked her SUV, and shot her 4 times. So, the courtroom proceedings were exactly what you would expect from someone like him. Jenkins claimed he was acting under the command of the Egyptian serpent god Apophis, howled during hearings, laughed as prosecutors described each murder, and inflicted repeated self-injuries throughout the case. Multiple forensic psychologists disagreed sharply on whether any of it was genuine. On May 30th, 2017, a 3-judge panel sentenced him to death for all 4 murders, plus 450 years on weapons charges. Judge Peter Bataillon called it one of the worst killing sprees in Nebraska history. In March 2025, Jenkins filed a handwritten letter asking the court to schedule his execution, which his own attorney publicly described as just more of the same. 2. Thomas Edward Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein, known inside as Terrible Tommy, first went to federal prison in 1975, convicted of armed robbery alongside his father and uncle. But it was what happened inside that defined everything. At the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, then the toughest federal facility in the country, Silverstein was convicted of murdering 2 rival gang members in the early 1980s. Then, on October 22, 1983, things escalated well beyond anything the Bureau of Prisons had prepared for. With another inmate slipping him a shank and a homemade handcuff key, Silverstein broke free and stabbed corrections officer Merle E. Klutz 40 times. Within hours, fellow inmate Clayton Fountain used the same method to kill a second officer, Robert Hoffman. Marion went into lockdown that same day and stayed locked down for 23 years. Because there was no federal death penalty for killing a correctional officer at the time, Silverstein received yet another life sentence. Bureau of Prisons Director Norman Carlson issued a near unprecedented no human contact order, so guards were instructed not to speak to him. He was eventually moved to ADX Florence in Colorado, a supermax partly designed in direct response to his crimes. He died there on May 11, 2019, at 67, after complications from heart surgery, having spent 36 consecutive years in solitary confinement. 3. Jaime Osuna. Jaime Osuna's face is almost entirely covered in tattoos, a pentagram on his forehead, and a Joker-style smile inked across his cheeks, and his crimes match that image. In November 2011, the body of Yvette Pena, 37 and a mother of 6, was found in room 19 of the El Morocco Motel in Bakersfield, California. She had been gagged, tortured, and left with multiple stabbing instruments in her back. Osuna pleaded guilty in 2017 and received life without parole. At sentencing, he gave the judge a thumbs up on his way out. Less than 2 years into that sentence, he killed again. His cellmate at Courtroom State Prison, Luis Romero, 44, had only been transferred there on March 7, 2019. 2 days later, guards found Romero dead during a morning check. Osuna had used a razor blade wrapped in string to torture and behead Romero overnight. Prosecutors believed Romero was conscious for at least part of it. Not just that, he had removed an eye, a finger, and a portion of a lung, made a necklace from the body parts, and written in blood across the walls. Assistant Kings County DA Phil Esbenshade publicly called it the most gruesome case he had ever seen. New charges of murder, torture, and mayhem were filed. But a judge ruled Osuna incompetent to stand trial after diagnoses of schizophrenia spectrum disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder, and he was transferred to the psychiatric inpatient program at Salinas Valley State Prison. 4. David Shaloo. In late August 2011, 3 men from Pittsfield, Massachusetts disappeared. David Glasser, 44, Edward Frampton, 58, and Robert Chadwell, 47, had sheltered together at Glasser's apartment during Tropical Storm Irene. 2 weeks later, their dismembered bodies were found buried in a trench in Beckett, Massachusetts. Each had been shot and then cut apart, apparently to make identification harder. It became the single largest investigation in Berkshire County history. David Shaloo, 47, of North Adams, was one of 3 men charged in the killings. The motive was witness intimidation. Glasser was scheduled to testify against Adam Lee Hall, a Hells Angels member facing serious charges, so Frampton and Chadwell were killed to eliminate them as witnesses. All 3 trials were moved to Hampden Superior Court in Springfield. Shaloo's jury deliberated over 5 days, and there was a tense moment when one juror reversed her verdict during individual polling on Thursday afternoon. The judge sent the jury back to deliberate, and by Friday, May 16, 2014, they returned unanimous guilty verdicts on all 9 counts, 3 each of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and witness intimidation. On May 19, 2014, Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder sentenced Shaloo to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Through his attorney, Shaloo offered condolences to the victims' families while maintaining he disagreed with the verdict. 5. Caius Veovvis. Of the 3 men convicted in the Pittsfield murders, Caius Veovvis was by far the most striking figure to walk into a courtroom. Born Roy Gutfinski Jr., he had legally changed his name in 2008 while serving time in a Maine prison, saying it was inspired by the Roman emperors Caligula and Nero, and an Etruscan daemon. By the time he stood trial in Massachusetts, he had subdermal horn implants in his forehead, a 666 tattoo between them, sharpened teeth, a split tongue, and facial tattoos covering nearly every surface of his face. Veovvis was the 3rd and final co-defendant tried for the murders of Glasser, Frampton, and Chadwell. Prosecutors argued he was a key participant in the plot to silence Glasser before Hall's trial. The jury deliberated for more than 36 hours across 6 full days before returning guilty verdicts on all 3 counts of first-degree murder, plus 3 counts each of kidnapping and witness intimidation. When the verdict came in, Veovvis turned to face the jury and told them he would see them all in hell, according to courtroom accounts. At sentencing on September 29, 2014, he declared his innocence before Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder and made clear he had no intention of asking for mercy. He received 3 consecutive life terms without parole, plus concurrent 8 to 10-year terms on the remaining charges, and the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court later denied his appeal in a 3-2 split decision. 6. Webb. Bass Webb was convicted of murdering 2 different girlfriends years apart, and his courtroom behavior was just as alarming as the crimes. On July 31, 2009, he forced his way into the Cynthiana, Kentucky, home of his ex-girlfriend, 32-year-old Bria Runowitz, a former Bourbon County Jail employee 3 days from starting a federal job. Her 2 daughters, aged 7 and 8, were asleep in the next room. Webb raped and decapitated her, left her body on the couch, then drove to the Bourbon County Detention Center parking lot in Paris and tried to run over a deputy sheriff and a pretrial officer with a geo-tracker. His time in court went exactly as expected. He spat on District Judge Vanessa Dixon at his arraignment, participated in a riot at the Fayette County Detention Center, and showed up to a later hearing with a skull tattoo listing people he wanted to kill. He was sentenced to 50 years in September 2012 for Runowitz's sexual assault and murder, and 37 years for the 2 attempted murders. Back in 2003, Webb had also choked another girlfriend, Sabrina Vaughn, to death in Montgomery County and buried her in Powell County, where her remains turned up in 2010. A jury convicted him on April 12, 2017, and a judge sentenced him to life on May 18, consecutive to the 50 years he was already serving. When asked to stand for the sentence, Webb refused. The judge sentenced him anyway. 7. Rodney Alcala. Rodney Alcala was handsome, well-educated, and a trained photographer who had studied film at New York University. In September 1978, right in the middle of his killing spree, he appeared on The Dating Game, introduced as a successful photographer who enjoyed skydiving and motorcycling. He won the date, but the bachelorette backed out after meeting him backstage because of his unsettling demeanor. Her instincts were right, because Alcala had already killed multiple women by then, and would keep going until his arrest in July 1979. An Orange County jury convicted him of 5 California murders. Jill Barkham, 18, killed November 10, 1977. Georgia Wickstead, 27, killed December 16, 1977. Charlotte Lamb, 32, killed June 24, 1978. Jill Parento, 21, killed June 14, 1979. And Robin Samso, 12, abducted June 20, 1979 while riding her bike to ballet class in Huntington Beach. He represented himself at trial, which did nothing in his favor, and was sentenced to death on March 30, 2010. In January 2013, Alcala pleaded guilty to 2 additional murders in New York: the 1971 killing of TWA flight attendant Cornelia Crilly, and the 1977 killing of aspiring conductor Ellen Jane Hover, and received 25 years to life for each. Alcala died on July 24, 2021 at the age of 77 from natural causes at a hospital near Courtroom State Prison, his California death sentence never carried out because of the state's moratorium on executions. 8. Kristen Gilbert. Kristen Gilbert was a registered nurse at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, Massachusetts, and by the time her co-workers started calling her the Angel of Death, it was no longer a joke. Between January 1995 and February 1996, the death rate in Ward C surged enough that 3 nurses formally reported their concerns. Prosecutors argued she was on duty for roughly half of the 350 deaths at the hospital since 1989. She was injecting epinephrine into patients' IV bags to trigger cardiac arrests, then responding to the emergency herself. Her then-boyfriend, James Perot, was a VA police officer required to attend every medical emergency in the ward, so prosecutors said she created the crises partly to see him. Her confirmed victims were veterans: Stanley Jagodowski, Henry Hudon, Kenneth Cutting, and Edward Squira. Her trial opened in Springfield, Massachusetts on October 16, 2000. After 83 hours of deliberation across 12 days, the jury found her guilty on March 14, 2001 on 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and 2 counts of attempted murder. Because the crimes occurred on federal property, she faced the federal death penalty, even though Massachusetts had abolished it. The jury could not reach a unanimous death recommendation, and on March 27, 2001, Judge Michael Ponsor sentenced her to 4 consecutive life terms without parole, plus 20 years for a prior bomb threat. She has been held at FMC Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas, ever since. 9. Levente Lazlo Lazar. Levente Lazlo Lazar was 27 and living in Bloomington, Indiana, when he drove over 2,400 miles to Grover Beach, California, to visit his 64-year-old mother, Athena Valentini, a licensed vocational nurse at the California Men's Colony. On October 24, 2018, he stabbed her 10 times in the neck at her South 9th Street condominium, took some of her belongings, and drove back to Indiana using a prepaid burner phone to avoid leaving a traceable record. A welfare check by Grover Beach police the following day found Valentini's body. No murder weapon was found. What built the case against Lazar was his own digital trail. On the drive back to Indiana, before anyone had found the body, he was already searching online for news about his mother's death. Investigators found the original of her will at his Indiana home, naming him as the sole beneficiary, and prosecutors argued at trial that he killed her to liquidate her estate and cover tax liens, student debt, and an upcoming wedding. The jury convicted him of first-degree premeditated murder on October 21, 2019, after a 3-week trial at San Luis Obispo County Superior Court, and also found true a special circumstances allegation that the murder was committed for financial gain. On December 11, 2019, Judge Matthew Guerrero sentenced Lazar to life without the possibility of parole at San Luis Obispo County Superior Court, the first such sentence handed down in that county in over 6 years. 10. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was known in Norwood Park Township as a generous contractor and local political figure who dressed as a clown called Pogo at charitable events and children's hospitals. He had been photographed with First Lady Rosalynn Carter on May 6, 1978. So when investigators searched the crawl space beneath his home at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in December 1978, what they found was staggering. 26 bodies buried there, 3 more elsewhere on the property, and 4 pulled from the Des Plaines River. Gacy had been killing since 1972, luring young men and boys with the promise of construction work, tricking them into handcuffs under the guise of a magic trick, then raping, torturing, and strangling them. His first victim was 16-year-old Timothy McCoy. He killed 32 more over the following 6 years. His trial began February 6, 1980, with a jury selected from Rockford because of the local media coverage. And after 5 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated 1 hour and 50 minutes before convicting him of all 33 murders on March 12, 1980. The following day, the same jury deliberated 2 hours and 15 minutes on punishment and recommended death. Judge Louis Garippo sentenced Gacy to death on March 13, 1980. He spent 14 years on death row painting clown portraits that sold for thousands of dollars while filing appeal after appeal, none of which prevailed. He was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center in Joliet, Illinois, on May 10, 1994. 11. Dennis Rader. Born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, Dennis Rader spent decades hiding in plain sight as a church president, a compliance officer, and a family man. Underneath all of that was one of the most methodical serial killers in American history, and he called himself BTK, which stood for bind, torture, kill. His first murders happened on January 15, 1974, when he broke into the Otero family home in Wichita, Kansas, and killed 4 members, including the parents, Joseph and Julie, and 2 of their children, 9-year-old Joseph Jr. and 11-year-old Josephine. Over the next 17 years, he killed 6 more people, mostly women, strangling them in their homes. Between murders, he sent taunting letters to local media and police describing his crimes in detail, then went quiet in 1979 for over a decade. He resurfaced in 2004 and that arrogance caught him. He sent a floppy disk to a local Fox television station. Police traced the metadata back to his church computer, and he was arrested on February 25, 2005. He pleaded guilty to all 10 murders on June 27th, and on August 18th, Judge Gregory Waller sentenced him to 10 consecutive life terms, a minimum of 175 years, the maximum Kansas law allowed. At sentencing, Rader delivered a rambling 20-minute statement widely described as self-congratulatory rather than remorseful, and the victims' families rejected it entirely. He is currently held at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. 12. Wayne Couzens. Wayne Couzens was a Metropolitan Police firearms officer assigned to guarding the U.S. Embassy in London, so people were supposed to be able to trust him. On March 3, 2021, 33-year-old Sarah Everard was walking home near Clapham Common in South London when Couzens approached, flashed his police warrant card, and handcuffed her under the false pretense she had violated COVID-19 restrictions. Prosecutors established that Couzens spent at least a month planning this, making unexplained trips to London to scout locations and buying a handcuff key on February 10th. On the day of the abduction, he finished a 12-hour shift at the US Embassy, picked up a rental car in Dover, and drove roughly 80 miles into London to find his victim. After handcuffing Everard, he drove her back to Kent, raped her near Dover, and strangled her with his police-issue belt. He burned her body in a freezer at Hodes Wood near Ashford and dumped remains in a pond nearby. Police dogs found her body on March 10th. Couzens was arrested on March 9th after investigators traced the rental car through CCTV. He pleaded guilty to kidnapping and rape on June 8th and to murder on July 9th. On September 30th, 2021, Lord Justice Fulford sentenced him to a whole life order at the Old Bailey, ruling his abuse of police authority was as serious as a murder to advance a political or ideological cause. His appeal was rejected in July 2022. 13. Zane Paora Wallace. Zane Paora Wallace was a Hells Angels gang prospect from Wanganui, New Zealand, and by the time Jasmine Wilson died on August 2, 2019, she had spent the final 9 months of her life being threatened, assaulted, and terrorized by him. Wilson was a 30-year-old mother of 2, Court testimony established that Wallace made repeated explicit threats throughout that period, telling her he intended to kill her, slit her throat, and beat her head in. Some of those threats were captured on recorded prison phone calls, so prosecutors had them on tape. On July 31, 2019, Wilson's battered and unconscious body was dumped at Whanganui Hospital's emergency department. She suffered severe head injuries, was transferred to Wellington Hospital, and died 2 days later on August 2nd. Wallace's father discovered her body after Wallace called for help, and his mother, father, and sister were all subsequently convicted of attempting to pervert the course of justice. Wallace contested the charge for years, but on July 25, 2022, the day his retrial was set to begin in the High Court in Whanganui, he pleaded guilty before a jury was even selected. Justice Francis Cook sentenced him on September 16, 2022, to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months. 14. Adam Lee Hall. Adam Lee Hall was a ranking member of a Western Massachusetts Hells Angels chapter based out of Peru, Massachusetts, and by 2011 he had become fixated on eliminating a man named David Glasser because Glasser was due to testify against him in a pending assault case. So Hall's solution was to make sure Glasser never reached that witness stand. On the night of August 27th into 28th, 2011, Tropical Storm Irene was bearing down on the region, and Glasser, along with 2 friends, Edward Frampton and Robert Chadwell, were sheltering together at Glasser and Frampton's Linden Street apartment in Pittsfield. Hall, along with co-conspirators David Shaloo and Caius Veovvis, abducted all 3. Prosecutors established that Glasser was targeted to silence him, and because Frampton and Chadwell were simply present, they were killed as well, so no witnesses remained. The 3 men were shot, dismembered with a power saw, and buried in a trench on private property in Beckett, Massachusetts, where police found the bodies on September 10, 2011. Hall was tried in Hampton Superior Court in Springfield and convicted on February 7, 2014, on 15 of 19 charges, including 3 counts of first-degree murder. 3 days later, on February 10, Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, noting that Glasser had a mental disability that made him particularly vulnerable and that the crimes were filled with depravity. Hall showed no reaction. 15. Michael Campbell. Michael Eugene Campbell, a career criminal, is one of the most visually striking criminal histories in recent memory. Campbell's face is almost entirely covered in tattoos, including an inverted pentagram on his forehead, Celtic-style ink across his temples and cheeks, and a polka-dot bow tie across his throat. His appearance is only part of it, because the criminal record beneath spans multiple states and nearly 3 decades. His earliest documented major offense came in Denver, Colorado, in October 1994, charged with attempted first-degree sexual assault. From there, his record grew across Colorado, California, and eventually Missouri, accumulating charges for robbery, property damage, assault, failing to register as a sex offender, being within 500 feet of a park as a registered offender, and violating protection orders. By 2013, he was back in Greene County Jail in Springfield, with 2 open felony cases pending. The most serious charge came in 2021. Campbell allegedly entered a Springfield home on May 30th, walked into a bedroom where a woman was sleeping next to her boyfriend, and began assaulting her. The boyfriend woke up and chased him out. Campbell was arrested nearby on a bicycle he had painted gold over its original blue. Prosecutors charged him with first-degree attempted rape and classified him as a persistent sexual offender under Missouri law, a designation carrying the possibility of life imprisonment without parole. If you made it to the end, drop a comment and tell me which case stood out to you the most, because the responses are always interesting. And if you want more videos like this one, subscribing really does help the channel grow, so that we can keep putting these together. See you in the next one.